All right, today we're diving into a really fascinating and, I gotta say, pretty provocative idea. What if the biggest shifts in Christianity weren't just random events? What if they actually follow a pattern, a revolutionary blueprint that connects them to some of the most massive upheavals in all of world history? So, to even begin to get our heads around this argument, we have to start right here with this really basic but super important question. What is the Catholic faith all about at its core? Is it a book, a set of ideas, or is it something else? The answer to this really sets the stage for everything we're about to unpack. Well, according to the source material we're looking at, the answer is really clear. For Catholicism, the faith is first and foremost about the Mass. It's sacramental. It's not a religion of the book. You can see the contrast right here. One is about reliving a mystery, something communal that happens around an altar. The other is much more about reading a text, something personal, interpreted from a pulpit. This distinction, it's absolutely crucial. Okay, so let's dig into that first idea, a religion of mystery. You have to remember, for most of Christian history, the average person couldn't read. So if you can't pass down the faith through a book, how in the world do you do it? Well, it was passed down through things you could see and hear and feel. It was an experience. Think about it. The truth was in the stories told in the stained glass windows, in the sound of the chants, the whole rhythm of the year marked by feast days, and, of course, in the ritual of the Mass itself. This was a faith that you lived together, not something you studied by yourself in a corner. So this brings up a big question then. If faith wasn't mainly about reading, what was the rule of the Bible? And maybe more importantly, who had the final say on what it actually meant? The source points directly to the Bible itself to make its case, right here in this passage. The argument is pretty straightforward. Scripture was never intended to be some standalone manual that anyone could interpret however they wanted. It needs a guide, an authority to help unpack it. And that leads us directly to this huge concept, Sola Scriptura. It literally means scripture alone. This is that foundational idea that came out of the Reformation, that the Bible, and only the Bible, is the ultimate, error-free source of faith, and that any individual can pick it up and understand it. So, what happens when you do that? Well, the source's take is pretty stark. It argues that when you remove a central interpreter, you get fragmentation. It points to the 40,000 plus Protestant denominations out there as Exhibit A, all reading the same book, but coming up with totally different, often contradictory beliefs. The source calls it doctrinal chaos. And this is where the whole argument pivots. The source doesn't see the Protestant Reformation as just a reform. No, it calls it the First Revolution. So the key idea here is that this wasn't just about fixing a few problems. It was a total teardown. It was about replacing a living, breathing tradition that had grown over centuries with a brand new system, one that was engineered, rational, and based entirely on a book. And now we zoom out, because the source claims that this first revolution wasn't a one-off thing. Nope, it was actually the blueprint for a pattern that would show up again and again, even in the big secular revolutions that shaped our modern world. The source lays out this really clear four-step pattern. Step 1, you declare a crisis. Say the old way is totally corrupt. Step 2, demolition. You tear down all the old symbols and traditions. Step 3, you bring in the experts, the committees, to install a new, supposedly rational system. And finally, step 4, it all falls apart. The grand promise fails, and you end up with chaos or something even worse. Okay, now this slide is where it all comes together. It's the whole thesis in one chart. You can see how the source maps that four-step pattern across these huge historical events. Each one starts with a revolt against something: tradition, the monarchy, religion. Each one has a noble justification, right? Purity, equality, justice. And each one uses a rational, engineered method to change things, which, the source argues, leads to a pretty negative spiritual result every single time. So what's the one thing that connects all of them? It's this core belief, you could almost call it an arrogance. It's the idea that a small group of smart people can sit down in a room and, using pure reason, design a better system from scratch than the one that has been built and tested by generations of human experience. And that brings us to the source's most provocative claim of all. Applying this exact same revolutionary pattern to the huge changes that happened inside the Catholic Church back in the 1960s, the event known as the Second Vatican Council. To build its case, the source draws this sharp contrast between the liturgy before and after the council. It describes the traditional Mass as vertical. It's all about humanity looking up towards God. It's about mystery, about quiet contemplation. The modern Mass, it argues, is horizontal. The focus shifts to the community, to each other. It's more intellectual, more about words and explanations and doing things. And this quote just nails the feeling it's trying to describe. The old way is like being alone on a mountaintop, something silent and awe-inspiring. The new way is more like a community meeting, a social and intellectual get-together. So the final verdict from the source is that these changes weren't just a reform, they were an internal revolution. And by trying to rationally re-engineer the single most important act of worship, it argues, the reformers ended up weakening the very faith they were trying to save. And that really leaves us with the question that's at the heart of this whole thing, doesn't it? Is tradition the collected wisdom of our ancestors, something precious that we should protect at all costs? Or is it just a barrier, an old wall that we have to tear down to build a better, more rational future? It's a question that goes way beyond religion. It kind of defines our whole modern world.